Our guest today will excite you. David Goddard is a Western Kabbalist, a teacher of secret knowledge. His book, Tree of Sapphires, is a compendium of esoteric lore and practical techniques to help understand the Kabbalah. His Tower of Alchemy is a must-have resource for all serious practitioners and lay readers alike. He lives in England, where he is a director of the Kabbalah Society, and he teaches internationally. David, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you very much.
Total pleasure to have you here with us, David. By the way of background here, we've here on Dreamland been opening a few chapters on Kabbalah and alchemy in recent months. The show's not exactly an alchemy forum, but we end up talking about it frequently. And you're not really talking to practitioners today, but people who are interested and conversant. So I wanted to start, if you wouldn't mind, with a little bit of an exploration about your bio. It says that you're a teacher and a lineage holder of the Western esoteric tradition who was trained by the Kabbalist Ben Halevi. What is the Western esoteric tradition, and who is Ben Halevi?
Okay. The Western esoteric tradition is really the mystical heart at the center of Western culture. So that's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to a degree. And the center of it is really generally called the Kabbalah. Zev Ben Shimon Halevi is one of the foremost living exponents of Kabbalah, and I've been a pupil of his for some 20 years. And even alchemy itself is really the practical aspect of alchemy, the practical aspect of Kabbalah, trying to manifest what the Kabbalah teaches in theory. And the lineage holder is quite simply somebody in a chain of teachers who've been trained, from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
So all the good bits are his and all the mistakes are mine.
That's great. Of course, alchemy, Kabbalah, at the center of it, I suppose, is a concept called the great work.
Yes.
What is the great work of alchemy and Kabbalah?
If one uses the theistic model of the Old Testament, just as a model, there's the idea of the garden, the fall, the coming in of death, etc. So alchemy, which is really the Western form of yoga. Alchemy is really Kundalini yoga for the West, using Western motifs, Western symbols. What it seeks to do is to return its practitioners, and in turn humankind, to the first garden. It's rather like that song, "We are stardust, we are children, and we have to get ourselves back to the garden."
We are golden, right?
Yeah. The idea is that everything in human life, every form of suffering, pain, illness, even death itself, are obstacles put in our way, not to prevent us from being something, but to spur us on in our evolutionary growth, so that we become consciously immortal, and so that, to use a theistic model, God may behold God in the mirror of the universe.
Yeah, one of our friends and popular guests on Dreamland is Sir Lawrence Gardner, who wrote that originally we didn't worship the gods, we worked for the gods. The temples, as we think of them, were actually workshops that were places of workship, not worship. And I did some checking on this and found some interesting Babylonian sources on it that suggest that this may be true, and that the work that we did for the gods was we served them food. And this meant that in order for the gods to accept the food served by humanity, that food had to be pure, and this meant that the servants of the food, the workers, were pure too. And this suggests that the gods must have taught us alchemy, the great work, in order to become pure. What are your thoughts on that, and what happened to that sort of approach to our relationship with the quote-unquote gods?
Yes. I think it comes down to, first of all, broadly speaking, I agree. The idea is with theurgy, which means to cooperate with the divine. And here we have the idea, found in all valid esoteric traditions, that at the depths of our deepest identity is the divine. We are one with the transcendent. We are gods in the becoming. After all, cats give birth to cats, and gorillas give birth to gorillas. God gives birth to gods. And so it's not about worship in the sense of cringing, what I call King Kong syndrome. It's about, well, let's give him a couple of virgins so he doesn't squash our village to pieces.
And there's only one at the top of the building, too, right?
Exactly. But it's about coming to know who we truly are, and what that truly is, whether we want to call it Buddha nature or the Christ within or the divine immanence, is to become aware of what we truly are, which is the divine. And so it's cooperation with, not falling on our face and debasing ourselves. That comes in when priesthoods cease to have true knowledge, true gnosis, so they resort to priestcraft, which is don't question me, just do what I tell you to. And that's why the esoteric traditions, particularly in the West, have been so persecuted down the centuries. So it's, in one sense, you're getting to know yourself, but the real self, with a capital S. And the great work itself is to become conscious of who and what we really are.
And so theurgy, then, as you describe it, is another term perhaps for God-making, of bringing the inner God out from within our true self. And
yes.
then you write that the completion of the great work confers upon those who attain it extraordinary control over physical conditions, including the transmutation of matter, the healing of all diseases, and tremendous prolongation of the span of human incarnation.
Yes.
Where are we at today, in a sense? Are we transforming this notion of the great work? Especially what I'm wanting to ask you about here is the way that the role of technology in the great work. It seems in the past we've been dependent on spiritual technology, but now there's all kinds of literal physical technologies that are coming online where literally it's feasible that within the next decade we could have a chip implant us that could help us promote the advancement of the great work within us. What are those thoughts? What are your thoughts on that type of an idea?
I suppose I'm old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you stick a chip in a human body, but in most cases the body's still going to die. And also, even if they did things like preserving brains, we have to remember the brain is a tool and it's not consciousness itself. My thoughts on it are, I think in one sense we stand on the threshold of a potential spiritual renaissance in which these things can be shared, explored, and practiced on a scale never done before. But on the other hand, I don't want to fall into the category, you could say, of saying, we're on the we're about to go through some quantum leap in consciousness. There isn't much evidence of that if one looks at the news hard in the face. But I do think that these things are being made available in a way never before, partly, I suspect, because the more serious the disease, the stronger the medicine that's required. And, now we have the potential with fanatics of all religions, with their nuclear-tipped arms, who can eliminate sentient life from this planet. So I sort of take the view of, yes, it's a time of enormous potential and could be really the most amazing developments, but also we need to, be cautious about it too and recognize, not get too sentimental about, how spiritual we are. So I think technology has a place, but it also cuts the other way too. I mean, I use the technology a lot, and I find it amazing that with this tiny thing called a cell phone, I can talk to students in South Africa. For me, it's almost miraculous. But nevertheless, it is the death of telepathy. I remember a teacher who's a friend of mine. She did some of her stuff for her university degree up in Canada towards the Arctic, where she studied amongst indigenous native peoples, and was surprised one winter, was staying with them, that the next morning all the elders were very excited because they all recounted the night before having gone in spirit or gone in dream states to another village some 500 miles away where there was a party and they could talk about so-and-so who'd broken a leg and so-and-so who died, and they all spoke as if they'd been there. And this really impressed this friend of mine, particularly when a couple of weeks later, when there'd been a thaw, visitors from that village came to it and confirmed every single detail. But the downside of it was that she went back there 20 years later, and this kind of practice had almost died out because of television. You see what I mean? There's a certain thing about, if you're there in the quiet, in the dark, in the dream time, then of course the psychic faculties, to use a term, come into operation. But if your mind is constantly distracted by entertainment and stimuli, what need has it to do such things? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a double-edged sword.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with David Goddard. David, just before the break, we were talking about the possible influence of technology on the great work. And I totally agree with you that technology is a dual-edged sword, but still one can't help but notice how the four symbols of the Grail, the disc, the cup, the rod, and the sword, are earth, air, and fire, and water in terms of the elements. But today these four elements are reflected in four new power tools: genes, bits, neurons, and atoms. And when one looks at the use of genetic technology, of computer technology, of neuroscience, and the nanotechnology, what one immediately sees is that missing here is the fifth essence, the fifth element, the quintessence.
Yes.
How can we begin to promote or to shine a light, if you will, on this incredible rapid advance of technology in the way that, as your story just illustrated, it's so easy to just suck people right down a black hole? What's it going to take for us to wake up and recognize the tremendous power that we have within ourselves, but also within the potentials of this technology?
The main issue at first is the human condition. I teach in America several times a year and in other countries around the world. Now, in America, for example, a nation blessed with great physical power and immense physical wealth. And there you see cases of people who have more leisure time than probably any other society on the planet. You see morbid obesity, great depression, great addiction. Now, it's not peculiar to America. It's just that the United States has resources that enables most of its population to have more leisure time to itself. And it would be the same with any other nation if they had that wealth or that power or that amount of leisure. So it's clear the problem is the human condition. In other words, you could give as much wealth, power, and leisure to any person, and unless they've worked on themselves, they're still going to fall into that morbid state. And it's because of dualistic thinking. And this is why alchemy, like yoga, Kabbalah, Vedanta, and other traditions, talks about recognizing the oneness of consciousness, that we are actually consciousness. Joseph Campbell put it very well when he said, "Are you the light bulb or are you the light itself?" Mm-hmm. Do you when the caretaker walks into the building in the morning, does he start moaning and saying, "Oh, gee, that was my favorite light bulb and it's just popped"? And my feelings about it is, if we're going to seriously deal with it, it has to begin with mutual respect, with willingness to see the sacred in other people's paths. We have to start reading religion as poetry and not as some newspaper report. We have to see that our way to the divine is utterly personal, that it's like you may have a favorite picture, I may have a favorite picture. So, you see, if I think that my way is the one and only way, of course that's very good for my self-esteem when I'm with people who agree with me. But if I meet somebody else who disagrees, I'm going to automatically demonize that person because they threaten my sense of who and what I am. Whereas, if I hold that, okay, this is a path that I find fulfilling, like a favourite piece of music or a favourite picture, but I meet somebody else who has an alternative taste, we may then start dialoguing about, well, what do you get out of your one? What gives you your bliss from this particular one? And I think in a world now where, take the Middle East, where there are three so-called religions of the book, all supposedly worshipping the same God, and they can't agree upon the same name, the same holy day of the week, and blowing each other to smithereens. And I think the first step has to be, a determination to respect our diversity. In fact, to celebrate it and to explore, what it is that helps us transcend ourselves, what it is that makes us live bigger than we otherwise would dare. And I'm finding more and more with the collapse of Orthodox religion, particularly in the West, this is where the alternative forms of spirituality are beginning to come into their own. Okay, well, so they're flaky, but you can call any world religion flaky when it first started out. And I think really people need to have that courage to seek the answers for themselves, not wait for so-called professionals to, try and instruct them in it.
Yeah, on that note of the individuals seeking for themselves, I'd like to share with you a story that had a big impact on me and get your thoughts on it. The person involved in the story, his name is Reggie White. He was a famous football player here in the U.S. He was a defensive lineman for the Green Bay Packers. He died last Christmas. And during the Super Bowl, his wife told this story of how Reggie was called the Minister of Defense because from the time he was a teenager, he used to go around preaching the gospel. And people, when he was in the NFL, got pretty sick of it. And so after he retired, Reggie found that he had time on his hands, and he started doing some research. And before he knew it, this Minister of Defense, this preacher of the gospel, stopped celebrating Christmas, stopped celebrating Easter, and refused to re-enter a Christian church. And he told all his Christian friends that story that they had been preaching was not the correct story. And what Reggie did is he decided that he wanted to learn to read and write Hebrew because he believed that was the original language in which the Gospels were written, and he felt that if he learned Hebrew, he could get closer to God. So he goes to Jerusalem, he hires a rabbi, he learns to read and write Hebrew. Then, just a few days before he dies, he has a dream in which he sees a golden treasure box. And upon this golden treasure box was written a word. Reggie White woke up that morning, went to his Hebrew dictionary, looked up the word, and it was the Hebrew word redeemed. And he died 2 days later. His wife says that Reggie never told her that he was ready to leave. But to me, that was such a profound story, and it relates to exactly what you're talking about a person who is willing to challenge their beliefs, who stretched their horizons and their wings, so to speak. And I just wonder if Reggie White, if he did not learn to read and write Hebrew, if he would have ever had that dream, and if that was, in a sense, his soul's message to him that he was ready to go. What are your thoughts on a story like that?
I think it speaks to the courage and nobility that are inherent in the human soul. I think it was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who once said, every human being has the potential to be a Buddha or a Hitler. And I think this is perfectly true. And when we see the great ones of humanity, a Buddha, a Christ, a Muhammad, whatever, they're not great exceptions. They're great examples of what it is to be fully human. I think we're still in process, and that's why I think we need to be more gentle with ourselves and with our brothers and sisters, that we're still in process. We're the last species, visibly, to arrive on this planet. And the more we recognize that we are all on a journey, each journey is unique in its way, but there are points in common. And the more we can support that and support the wonderful capacity that human beings have for kindness, for tenderness, for understanding of each other, the human family itself can only be enriched by this. But while we keep demonizing each other because of our color or our religion or our sexual orientation or our politics or whatever, we're just going to make each other miserable. And, life is too wonderful to spend our time in the misery camp. And so that story you told, I think that's an example of a true seeker daring to, as you say, to go beyond their own horizons and finding their own answers.
One of the great pieces of insight that you had in the Tower of Alchemy concerned the idea of the solar drop, which you describe as an indestructible drop, a seed atom that is perceived by some as a drop of molten gold. Talk about the idea of the solar drop for a moment, please.
This comes from, it's present in all valid esoteric traditions, and I touched on it briefly in another sense earlier. It's the idea that at the very center of the human being, there is this solar drop. In Buddhism, it's called Buddha nature. In esoteric Christianity, it's the Christ within. It's the divine presence in the heart of hearts. It's the actual core of being. It's the only thing that is truly eternal in most cases. And it's believed that this is the fetus, if you like, of the immortal body of a sage, or what in Christianity has been called the resurrection body, because for them Jesus is the best known case, or in Tibet it's called the rainbow body of clear light. And this is the fetus, the secret of the golden flower in Taoism. And the only thing that feeds this, unlike the physical body that's sustained by food and by breath, unlike the subtle bodies that are sustained by energy and by emotion, the only thing that causes the indestructible drop to grow, to change from fetus into fullness, is it is held bliss. And bliss is not the same thing as ecstasy. Bliss is a non-dual state. In other words, becoming one with everything. I've noticed that people who lead the most fulfilled lives are those people who live for something bigger than themselves. While we still think in terms only of our own gratification, of our own needs, important though those are, I'm not saying they're invalid, but if we live for those and those only, we miss the point. It's most of the time, you see, we're so tied up with the paranoia and neurosis of our daily life. We walk to work, we pass 1,000 people, and we don't see one of them. We're too busy in our heads, either regretting something that happened yesterday or dreading something that might happen tomorrow. And yet all around us is splendor unfurled. The sky, the wonder of human face, nature itself is just so amazing. And it's only when we come out of that dual state, when we expand our awareness, that we have a glimpse of that. And if we, as one of the Sufis said, if we allow ourselves to thaw, if we melt into that, we enjoy bliss. No matter how momentary, it doesn't matter. We enjoy it. And the solar drop, by that degree, is thus expanded.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with David Goddard. David, just before the break, we were talking about the idea of the solar drop as that core within us that seeks to expand, to grow somewhat like a fetus. And as you were talking, I was recalling some readings that I've done in the Gnostic texts, and in particular, one book is called The Hypostasis of the Archons, or The Reality of the Rulers, which describes almost an alien presence that, while not having physical form, can take a physical form. Their mission is to take from us something that they don't have. And what they don't have and what we have sounds very familiar to me as you're describing the solar drop. It's described as a divine particle within us. In your research, in your teachings, how do you deal with this idea of predators, be they an alien species, an extraterrestrial species, or an energy field or force that seeks to keep us distracted and from truly nourishing our divine particles or our solar drop within us?
Well, I may not be popular for this view. It's just that nowadays we tend to use the term Gnostic in a very blanket fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between Gnostics who actually have gnosis, transcendental knowledge, and Gnostics with a small g that were mainly dualists. And some of the Gnostic schools, the period, is a favorite human activity. We love to scapegoat. We love to blame somebody else for our misery. So if it's not Satan, if it's not the demiurge, if it's not the government, it's always somebody else's fault, because then we don't have to take responsibility for our own unhappiness. And where the ageless wisdom really, in a sense, utterly contradicts, some views, is it says that we live in a universe that is ensouled by compassion. Mm-hmm. The universe is bending over backwards to make us into the most wonderful, brilliant, gorgeous, fantastic beings we can be. Whereas, most people, most exoteric forms of philosophy prefer the view of as a hostile universe. Of course, governments prefer us to think it's a hostile universe.
Absolutely.
That we're powerless, that we can't make any difference, so that we won't bother and try. We'll just sit on the sofa and watch TV and eat chips. Mm-hmm. And that way we won't do anything. We won't rock the boat. So, yes, of course, there are, if you like, forces of opposition, both exterior to us and within ourselves. But in a certain sense, to a degree, they're there in the same way as a rival in business isn't actually an enemy. They just call on us to find inner reserves we didn't know we had. You probably know the real meaning of the word education is to call forth from within. And after all, take, for example, disease, where human beings have been, suffering from it since the beginning. And yet, the very thought of it has made people sometimes dedicate their entire lives to finding the cure for certain diseases. Or how many human beings for centuries looked up at the sky and saw the birds and thought, I wish I could do that. And now we do. So in a sense, these things exist to bring out our divine potential. They're actually blessings in disguise, hard as it is sometimes to believe it, particularly when we're going through the mill. But the teaching in the ageless wisdom is that the universe is benevolent, that is a nursery in which we grow into our conscious immortality, into our conscious Godhead.
I was in France a couple of years ago with a group, and in fact I'm going back this weekend. And one of the things that we did is we climbed the spiral staircase of the watchtower, the bell tower at Chartres. And about halfway up, the people following me, I could hear them huffing and puffing behind me, and I know that they were really angry at me for putting them through this pain and putting them through what they considered to be torture. But then we arrived at the top of the bell tower, and there was the reward. It wasn't that a form of alchemy in and of itself, of the analogy, of the metaphor of climbing the tower and having to transmute our base emotions into a higher, finer vibration?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the mystical quest. That is climbing the mountain of attainment. That is finding the Grail. That is what it's all about.
In your book,
yourself beyond.
Mm-hmm. In your book, The Tower of Alchemy is loaded with exercises. So is the Tree of Sapphires. And I wonder, for, let's say, a novice to an intermediate practitioner or person that's interested in studying this, what would be a very cornerstone kind of practice or exercise that you would recommend that we could do for ourselves?
Yes. I just first quickly want to just address that, because in my books, as you've mentioned, and also in my workshops and seminars, I always include experiential elements. I find nowadays, we get so many things as second-hand information. And I find that really seekers nowadays, they don't want that. They don't want to be told what it's like. They want some taste of it for themselves. And that's why when teaching, I always, encourage, meditation, sacred ceremony, chanting, anything that helps expand consciousness. So when they leave the room, they can say, well, at least I got a taste of it. At least I've got some sense of what it feels like, not just a bunch of theory. I got some taste of it. But back to your question about a core practice. Well, actually, you gave it yourself when we were talking about the indestructible drop, the spark of divine light present in the heart of hearts of all sentient beings. Walking along the street, passing those thousands of people on the way to work, just to momentarily let your mind just for a fraction think of that diamond drop in the heart of everybody you're walking past. And to know that through the eyes and the face of the person you momentarily see, the divine is looking at you. That itself, simple as it sounds, is so nourishing, so rewarding. You see, we walk around in streets in dualistic mindsets. So, we're scanning people. I like the way she dresses. I don't like his shoes. I like that. I wish I had a car like that. Whereas in this, you're getting into the best game in the universe. You're affirming the divine in everything your eyes momentarily rest on.
Yeah, I did that this morning on my morning walk, David. I had that apprehension or sense of that divine drop within me that was motivating or causing this physical body to move forward on this walk, and it really was. It was quite a revelatory feeling. The question I wanted to ask you as a corollary to that is a question that I think is probably one of the most important questions that anybody interested in these subjects can ask, and that is, what is the human body? What is the human body, David?
It's a diving suit. It's so that what we really are, a divine and spiritual being, can experience time and space, and therefore gain experience and become conscious of what we are. We come in as innocence. We have all the potential, but we're innocent. We don't know we've got it. It's like a kid. But through time and space, through our interactions with each other, through the laws of karma, merit, and debt, so we become more and more aware of what we actually are. And the body itself is a means whereby, after all, if you want to interact with the astral level, you have to be in your astral body. If you want to interact with the spiritual level, you have to be in your spiritual body. If you want to react at the physical level, you need to wear a physical form, at least for the sake of other people around you. Mm-hmm. It's very easy for me in my physical form to hold this telephone to my ear. If I was in my astral form, it would take an enormous amount of telekinetic energy to hold this phone up to my astral ear.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with David Goddard, author of Tree of Sapphires and the Tower of Alchemy. David, for a moment, I want to talk about the idea that you brought forward. I think it was in Tower of Alchemy about politicians and telepathy. In the book, you noted that throughout history, there have been men and women in politics whose ideals and insights have raised them from the level of politician to that of statesman. And that when these people remain true to their ideals, the hierarchy can work through them. Is this hierarchy what someone might think of as the Illuminati, or who are we describing here? And can you give us an example of a politician that raised to this level?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
Winston Churchill. People of destiny, people who came in to do a piece of work, who were bigger than the time and the situations around them. And then it's almost as if when they fulfilled their destiny, they then fall back, and then after a while, they go. The idea of the hierarchy in Buddhism, they would call them the bodhisattvas, the Lord's compassion. Those people who have already attained, like I was saying before, there are those who are really great examples of what we are all destined to become. And because, like the universe, they are motivated by love, by compassion, so to those who are willing to open themselves to their influence, so they will try and guide and help those of us who are still on the journey back.
Very interesting, because the Cathars talk about the perfecti as being individuals who attain that state and you, as you describe, have remained local, so to speak, in order to assist those that want to make that journey. And I thought I heard somewhere that the bodhisattvas have signed, in a sense, a contract in which they will remain here attached to the earth until all those that have gone before them or choose to attain that state have gone before them.
Absolutely. It's the same concept. They decide not to enter nirvana, not to enter cosmic consciousness until all beings have been lifted.
And that sounds like a rescue mission to me.
Rescue mission, yeah, or just help.
Or just help.
In the same way as, at school there are kids in senior classes, kids who are older, been round the block more often, or you do an apprenticeship and work, you learn your job, but there's, somebody who's been there longer and they can show you and guide you. Somebody who teaches you how to use the microphone and how to do whatever it is and things. I think it's a similar thing.
There's two other...
Can I just bring up the subject about technology? Because,
yes,
as you mentioned earlier, and I was talking about the cell phone and telepathy, because one of the things I'm engaged with at the moment is a thing called Rising Phoenix Foundation, and it's just our own attempt to use the technology that exists to broadcast spiritual teachings in a wider way. So we're beginning to look at things like using DVDs, CDs, animations to help with visualizations, webcasting so that people can participate in meditations and ceremonies even in their own homes. So, it all has a part to play.
Very interesting. In the few minutes we have left, there's a subject that is near and dear to my heart and my research interest, and that's the subject of blue stones. And you touch on this in your book, The Tree of Sapphires, and I just wanted to ask you about this, that on his first trip up Mount Sinai, Moses is supposed to have brought down a set of sapphire stones or blue stones. The Anunnaki gods of Sumeria came to earth in search of gold and blue stones.
Yes.
Luz, the name of the place where Jacob had his experience with the ladder that reached into the heavens, was supposed to have been made of sapphires. Saddam Hussein is supposed to have had a blue stone in his armpit, which may have been the same blue stones hidden by Jeremiah from Nebuchadnezzar. What do you make of such legends, and how are they connected with the Tree of Sapphires?
Well, you also find, of course, amongst the ancient Egyptians, that they, like the Babylonians, were great lovers of lapis lazuli, which is a blue stone. Essentially, in Kabbalistic thinking, blue is the color associated with the spiritual realm, with the realm of the gods, the realms of the archangels. And so sapphires is often a play on that particular idea. And it is this sense that humanity has of having come from somewhere else. Unfortunately, it often gets degraded into thinking, well, they came by a spaceship or whatever. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I just wasn't there at the time, so I couldn't tell it. But we do have this sense. This is why I call the human body a diving suit. Humanity has a sense that it is a stranger to this planet. After all, we're not terribly effective animals. Our eyesight isn't as good as many other species. We're not as strong in proportion to our bodies as many other species are. We have this sense that we come from somewhere else. I mean, no other creature on this planet anticipates its own death in the way that humans do. They don't raise monuments to the dead. They don't build places of worship to an invisible force. It's a peculiar human thing. And the sapphires, the sapphire tablets with Moses. The tradition is the first set he brought down was sapphire written in black fire, and then these were then smashed when he saw the children of Israel with the golden calf. But you find this theme running through most esoteric traditions, and it is really about true, authentic spiritual knowledge being brought down, being preserved, being transmitted through lines of teachers to their students and things. And even the idea of the sapphire staff that Moses receives from Jethro, this idea of connection to the upper worlds where higher knowledge is possible. After all, the word Kabbalah itself means to receive. So it means to receive from higher frequencies of consciousness, so that, if you like, life makes sense. We know why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing, what the ground rules are. You have a similar thing amongst Navajo, I believe, with the turquoise. You know, they have this great love of it as a symbol of the vaults of heaven.
Yeah, very interesting. It appears over and over again. And in connection with this, I want to talk about an idea that you bring forward in the Tree of Sapphires concerning the cosmic Christ. And you write that esoterically it is taught that the Christ, the Anointed One, is an office, like that of a president or the master of a Freemasonic lodge, and that this office is held by different individuals at different times, and it is taught that there is always a man or a woman upon this planet who, for their time, fills that office as the axis of the world upon whom all grace rests. Do we have such a figure filling that office today on our planet?
Indeed.
And who would that be?
Oh, I don't move in such illustrious circles.
How would we identify this person, and what would be the actions to look for?
Their function isn't to be identified. It's very rarely, only in points of crisis, that they step onto the human stage, and then you see a Jesus or a Gandhi. But most of the time, their work is behind the scenes, facilitating the flow of consciousness from higher realms, to lower realms. I mean, I think what often happens with people is, when they first read about these things, they think, oh, I must be taught by a master. And, preferably the higher the master, the better. But they don't realize that most of us, we wouldn't be capable of it. The few very high souls I've been privileged to even glance at, often their presence alone either inspires immense devotion or profound hatred. There's no ambivalence in between.
So like Howard Stern, yeah.
Yeah, so most of us are a mix. But they, in their cases, they stimulate, this great thing. And then after all, these masters, and like the Christ, are like the bodhisattvas. Their job is to ameliorate behind the scenes, radiating thoughts of grace and of mercy, into human consciousness.
Well, look at the Live Aid event. Did you follow the story of the Live 8 event recently, the concerts that were held around the world that were headlined by Bono and Paul McCartney? Yes. Doesn't that strike you as an example of the office that you're describing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And who's to know where those inspirations come from? I mean, this is why, although grimmest things appear sometimes, perhaps it's the optimist in me, we still see examples of amazing human nobility and striving to do wonderful things. I mean, look at Oprah Winfrey. I mean, it was unbelievable 15 years ago that somebody would be talking about the pains and sufferings of people, giving them a chance to redeem themselves, going to South Africa, helping the children. I mean, that's just one of many, many, many examples. We have such divine potential, and we're also such great idiots. Well, I'm talking to myself, really.
Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Dreamland. What are your plans for teaching in the near future? Are you going to be in the United States anytime soon where people have an opportunity to see you?
All of October, I'm in the States. I'm teaching in Boston and then in Nashville, Tennessee for the first time.
Wonderful, my hometown.
Oh, right. Well, I've never been there before, so I'm looking forward to that. Then I'm going to Phoenix, Arizona, and then back to Boston.
And your website is davidgoddard.com?
Yes, www.davidgoddard.com. And if people are interested, there's also a brand new newsletter called Bennu that we're putting out, and it's got teachings and things in there, and people can get that for free if they just want to sign up for it.
Well, I hope everybody will take the opportunity to include your books in their library, because they certainly are wonderful reference works. And again, with the exercises that you've packed in there, it seems that if a person were to devote themselves just to the Tree of Sapphires, for instance, for the period of, a month to 3 months, maybe, they would begin to see tremendous change. Is that a reasonable proposition?
Yes, so I have seen, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
David. Well, I hope you'll keep in touch with us, keep us posted. I know you're going to have an exciting conversation with Whitley on the subscriber section that everybody needs to stick around and listen to. And we'll look forward to having you back on Dreamland again.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your kindness.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. See you next time.
Up next, Linda Moulton Howe. You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe, reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts that others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week, she's reporting on crop circles right here in the United States, plus formations appearing in England. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Yeah, beginning on June 13th of this year, a series of 6 circle patterns in North Carolina grasses began to emerge, all at elevations above 2,000 feet. American crop circle investigator Jeffrey Wilson told me this week, quote, "We really have not seen crop circles in locations at this kind of elevation before, so I think this is notable," unquote. Jeff is director of the Independent Crop Circle Research Association in Ohio. He has gathered over 500 reports related to crop formation events in the United States from 1880 to 2005. The majority of American crop formations have occurred east of the Mississippi River, and Ohio has had the most, at least 35 crop formations to date. But this 2005 summer, it is North Carolina that has provoked Jeff and his colleagues to make several trips to the mountain country around Asheville, between Jupiter and Mars Hill, to Burnsville and Green Mountain. Like last year in Ohio, when Jeff reported crop formations there lining up on 2 straight lines that intersected, this year Jeff has also found that 6 of the North Carolina grass patterns also are on a line. Further, the line intersects in Oakville, West Virginia, with another straight lineup of crop formations that extends to the 2004 Ohio formations that were on a straight line from Miamisburg to Reardon, Ohio, and down to Oakville, West Virginia. Oakville is famous for several unidentified flying objects in the fall of 2003, followed by a grass circle in April of 2004. You can see photographs of that UFO and all the circles discussed in this report at earthfiles.com. Just go to www.earthfiles.com, and at the top of the headlines page, there are hot links to these reports. No one has a definitive answer about why there are straight lineups of crop formations, but I asked Jeff to describe the straight line phenomenon so far in North Carolina and his investigation of a 4-circle pattern in 6-foot-tall hay in Leicester, where the farm owners reported a blinding white light before midnight on June 21st, 2005.
Based on those 4 initial circles, we plotted the location of those as best as we knew at the time on the map, and it turned out that they pretty much fell on a single straight line, going from southwest to northeast.
Okay.
We got a pilot and a plane, and we went back down to North Carolina the following week after we had visited the first one, and we flew along a heading after plotting those out on a GPS. We flew along that line, and we discovered 2 additional formations.
Wow.
That were right on that line.
And where were they?
The first one is in a little town just to the northwest of Jupiter called Mars Hill, and that is in Madison County.
Okay.
Delphi Knockelman spotted this circle out of the plane. It had already been harvested in hay. It was approximately 20 feet diameter.
Okay.
As we continued to fly the line up toward Green Mountain, we got to Burnsville, and I spotted the last formation, the 6th formation, again in grass. This is actually the largest of all of the formations. It's about 110 feet across. It is essentially a single ring, large 110-foot ring, with a straight line pathway to the center where there is a 23-foot swirled circle in the center of that formation. We landed the plane, drove up to that site first, and the landowner knew nothing about it, even though it was pretty much adjacent to his house. I have to say that these formations were in some of the most obscure, hard-to-reach places. All of these crop circles in North Carolina are above 2,200 feet in elevation. They are way up in the mountains, and these are this area of North Carolina and into West Virginia are the highest mountains east of the Mississippi River. We really have not seen crop circles in locations at this kind of elevation before.
Mm-hmm.
And for the third crop circle that was reported in North Carolina was at a place called Leicester, Leicester, and that is in Buncombe County, Buncombe County.
Right.
That is to the southwest of Yancey County.
Right, I'm looking at it.
Okay. And there was a 4-circle formation that was found there in 6 to 7 foot tall hay. The morning after, more than a dozen people, including the landowners, observed a blinding white light lasting for several seconds around 11:15 p.m., and that was on the 21st of July, so about a week after the first 2 up in Green Mountain. Witnesses from about a 10-mile radius around...
You mean June 21st?
I'm sorry, June 21st.
Yeah, okay.
Witnesses from about 10 miles around that formation reported seeing the light. Animals in all those locations were reported and extremely agitated. The landowner's dog, they had 2 dogs. One was in the basement, what they called a cow dog for helping herd the cows, was locked up in the basement, tried to rip the door off when this light appeared. The other dog that was upstairs with them also sort of went nuts. No tracks were found leading into this 4-circle formation, which consists of a large single central circle about 75 feet across, and 3 separate between 10 and 18 foot diameter circles tangent to the main circle in sort of a spaced apart in a triangle. That formation was also in grass. It was in a hayfield. We went to the Leicester formation, which, of course, we found to be one of the most intriguing ones because of the eyewitness report, seeing this brilliant white light. It turns out that those landowners who really wish to remain unidentified at this point, they don't really want, a lot of attention or anything. They just want to understand what's happening in their field. They refuse to even report their crop circle to the local press because the local press had reported on the Green Mountain Formation and had done a pretty good ridicule job of it. So they did not want to go through that kind of a ringer.
What did you see with your educated eyes in that grass that you thought might be anomalous?
Well, the first thing is when you get up there, the main circle has an extremely unusual double S-shaped swirl in the main circle, meaning that it doesn't start in the center and is swirled outward like a whirlpool or something like a big giant swirl. This actually it has got this double S-shaped swirl to it, so the grass goes in multiple different directions. And at first it just looked like a mess, but to understand how this is actually swirled down is very complicated. That really struck us, right away. That was really unusual.
And did these swirls involve multiple layers?
Only in a couple of cases. There were only a couple of areas where there were overlapping places where the grass would, be in layers.
And were they 90-degree angles?
Actually, more like 180 degrees, where the direction actually reversed flow 180 degrees.
I see. Had you seen that before?
I've not seen a double S shape before. I've seen single S shape,
right?
But I've never seen a double S shape before. And I can't recall in the literature of seeing it being reported elsewhere. There was another very interesting thing about the smaller tangent circles to the main circle. These circles are only between 10 and 19 feet in diameter. And when the landowners woke up in the morning after the bright light and saw the crop circles out there in their field, they sent their son out to go look at them. And so he drove his four-wheeler out in the field and drove out up next to it, and he reported that the area smelled like a campfire that had just been put out. And when he walked into the formation, in the smaller circles, the three smaller circles, he reported that they were burned in the center, and he did take photographs of it. So the centers of those appear to have been burned.
Were you able to examine those burns yourself?
Well, we did examine the areas that he reported the burn from, but we had gotten there about 9 days after the formation happened, and they had rain for the previous 3 days, and they had like 7 inches of rain. So a lot of that evidence seems to have sort of melted away or disappeared, but we did find some trace evidence of what appears to be burned, stems of grass, and so we did collect some samples of that. But his original photographs definitely show that document.
And that would be highly unusual in the whole history of crop formations around the world. There hasn't been much burning anywhere, or scorching. Yeah,
there really hasn't been, and it's very rarely reported, but it does get reported from time to time.
Now, do you have any lab analysis back on this formation or any of the 6 yet?
Yeah. We were able to sample 3 of the 6. The other 3 have already been cut. So we've had time now to only do an L-meet test or node elongation measurement test on the Lester Circle formation. And it does come up positive that we do have elongated nodes in the grass from the Lester formation. Just up the road from the Lester four-circle formation was a triangular-shaped field of rye grass, which was pretty much about ready to harvest. To be honest with you, I've never seen rye grass this tall. It was about 7 feet tall.
Yikes.
But this grass was flattened like a randomly down formation, but in the shape of the triangular-shaped field.
Huh. So it's like an echo of the big field.
Correct. Okay. And that field also appears pretty much on the same line as all the other 6 geometric formations.
Right.
Now, that was when we went down the first time. Just across the street from that field is a cornfield. And when we went down there the first time, it was intact. But when we flew over it on our second trip down there, we discovered that now that field also has been flattened in a randomly down patch. And that corn is flattened so hard to the ground, it's like impacted. And it's generally in the shape of a square, but that too also appears on the line. And I have a single photo that you can see the Elixir formation, the ryegrass triangle field that's flattened, and the square flattened area in corn all in the same photo. If we go to the Burnsville formation, which was in grass, the large ring with the circle in the center with a pathway, that formation was really unusual in the sense I've never come across a formation that was on such a severe slope. This slope was at about a 45, 50-degree angle. Very severe slope. And unusually, this is the first formation I've run across in which, in the field grass, there were blackberry bushes. And one of those blackberry bushes is also flattened in the middle of the ring, and none of the berries on it were damaged.
If you put down berries and they're flattened and nothing has happened to the berries, that suggests some kind of a pressure that is not physical, meaning not hard mechanical physical.
Right. It wasn't as if somebody flattened this with a garden roller or a board, because that would have left clear damage on the fragile berries.
Right. So this is very significant.
It was certainly unusual, yeah. Now, we did take samples of the berries that were flattened, and we did take samples of the berries that were out in the rest of the field. So perhaps WC11 can do a germination of those. Find something interesting.
Now, is there anything else anomalous that we haven't discussed?
Well, we did take radiation readings in both the Burnsville formation and the Elixir formation. And at this point, I've got some additional work to make a confirmation on that, but at this point it appears that both of those formations had elevated radiation readings. And compared to the above average, above background reading that you had in Ohio, I think in one of the formations there, how would this one compare? About twice the level. Is this then the highest radioactive reading you've gotten in a crop formation? No, not by far. Okay. But it is above the statistical background. And the highest radioactive reading that you got was where? I would have to say that would be Paulding, Ohio, back in 1996. That was about 10 times the background. And in any of these where you have gotten radioactive readings, have you ever had any kind of explanation for why there would be radioactivity in a crop formation in any of these fields? No. There really isn't a known physical process that can generate the radioactivity that we see for the amount of time that it seems to last. It never seems to last longer than 10 or 11 days. And there really isn't any radioactive isotopes that decrease their radiation in that length of time. So either something is continually generating radioactivity and then just stops, or this is something that we really aren't sure what's going on. And WC11 has always said that from his hypothesis point of view, it's spinning plasma with a very complex range of energies, and one could include what? Some form of gamma ray, X-ray, or something that could cause
some kind of radiation?
Well, that's possible, but we're picking up the radiation across all the bands, alpha, beta, and gamma. So that makes it even more difficult to determine what the isotopes might be.
Do you have any hypothesis?
We haven't really come to one at this point because so much of the data that we're seeing is so puzzling. That there seems to be so many unknown factors included here that we're pretty much staying away from committing to one hypothesis right now. We're keeping our minds open. Mm-hmm.
At this point, you've been studying these for a long time, especially focused in the United States. Privately, your own intuitive gut, what do you think could be responsible for these that are anomalous?
Well, that's generally the million-dollar question, isn't it? That idea of forming a hypothesis has gone in and out of my mind over the last 10 years, and what I found is that just as we seem to be approaching something that resembles an answer that we could postulate, some new piece of evidence comes up that we just have to go back to square one. And so I sort of learned to refrain from committing to any gut hypothesis because the data just is so varied that we can't really commit to one.
Does that fact alone suggest that humans are not responsible?
Well, it's certainly the evidence is pretty clear and convincing and documented now that not all crop circles are being made mechanically by people. That's absolutely clear. There are certainly ones that people are making, and you know, the hoaxing teams have been out there and they're getting pretty good, and they've been doing it for a while. But there is this large population of crop circles out there that has enough evidence that shows that the typical hoaxing method just cannot produce the kinds of things that we're seeing.
Beyond North Carolina and Ohio, across the Atlantic Ocean, in Poland, the Czech Republic, and England, crop formations currently are being reported. At least 13 in July so far in 6 different British counties. The well-known Wiltshire County, West Sussex, Kent, Hampshire, Oxfordshire, and North Somerset. One in Garsington, Oxfordshire, was at least 500 feet in diameter, reported on July 15th. It's 12 circles joined at the edges in a large circle around a central 13th circle that is a bit smaller. The 12 circles are joined by a pattern of connecting lines, some say orbital lines, and 4 of the circles are laid down in such a way that they reflect brighter than the other circles, so they stand out. And you can see a beautiful photograph of this, along with all of the formations that Jeffrey Wilson was talking to me about, at my website, earthfiles.com. Again, go to the top of the headlines page, and you will find hot links to these stories. And the Garsington, Oxfordshire, is in the story on July 15th and July 18th. And this is very important because about this spectacular large pattern, I received an email from a major scientist who wishes to remain anonymous and is based in northwestern Australia. This is what he wrote, quote, "This new one shows, I think, the precession of Mercury about our sun. 4 times a year, Mercury becomes visible above the western horizon, 2 weeks ago, for example, and hence the 4 white circles." He's referring to the brighter ones. Einstein used the slow advance of Mercury's elliptical orbit to deduce his theory of general relativity, namely that motional gravity is slightly stronger than gravity at rest. The scientist shows a series of formulas related to Mercury's orbit and concludes, quote, "Very intelligent indeed, in my view at least," unquote. And Whitley, I would say it is unexpected intelligence that continues to evolve in worldwide crop patterns, leaving in its wake the always haunting question, besides their beauty, What are they for?
Well, you know something interesting, Linda. Today on Dreamland, William Henry interviewed David Goddard. David Goddard is an alchemist, and he had a fascinating and unexpected take on what the sun was. He was saying that what we're dealing with is not an inanimate object at all, but a part of a sort of universal consciousness. And this unexpected, for me, direction of this crop circle toward Mercury, which is, of course, orbiting the sun at a very close distance, suggests perhaps that, and then you've seen it yourself, these strange little sparks of light that seem to be associated in some way with the formation of crop circles.
Right.
Perhaps we're dealing here with a consciousness so profoundly different from what we even understand as a life form that we're looking into a truly alien mind when we look at a crop circle.
And yet its common denominator seems to be mathematical and geometric. And when I look back over to 1995, 10 years ago, and you see the emergence of those, what everyone seemed to agree, look like solar system patterns for the first time. And there is the famous one in which there were the 9 orbits around a central circle, and everyone assumed that it was a representation of our solar system, and yet the third ring from the sun, which we would identify as the Earth's orbit, was empty of a circle, i.e. empty of a planet, if it was a representation of the solar system. And many people then, in 95, and over the last 10 years, the question has been asked, are we dealing with an intelligence that is trying to warn while it is doing something else? Are we dealing with an intelligence that can see past, present, and future, and that regardless of what other reasons these crop formations may be providing, that maybe part of all of this is a mathematical language, and that it is trying to warn perhaps of something astronomical, but that we humans, for the most part, absolutely seem incapable of understanding.
You know, when you're with the visitors and you have close encounter experiences like I've had, not always, but most of the time, if you spend any real conscious time with them, not in their context, but say in the woods where I met with them not quite a few, but a few times, things change. The world, the way it looks changes. The flora and the fauna change. The structures come to be that are not normally there. And I wonder, in thinking about that, if perhaps that wasn't a representation of the solar system as it is now in another level of reality, and we have fallen, as it were, from grace. And that's why we're not there.
Well, I don't know, and I understand what you're suggesting, these issues of timelines and time slips, but when it comes to the crop circles, I think the longtime investigators at least would agree on this, that there really is no hard evidence of a link to the extraterrestrial biological entities that seem to have been very much involved with humans in what is called the human abduction syndrome that you're talking about. It would seem that perhaps a different kind of intelligence, as you were referencing, is taking place here. And when you look at the email that the scientist sent me, it includes a lot of formulas. And when you look at the formulas, Whitley, it is so clear to me, you and I and most people, no matter how much education that we have had, we cannot look at these formulas and they don't translate to anything. That you have to have another human who is skilled, educated in a very specific kind of orbital mechanics to make sense out of these formulas. And you realize that in the planet of 6.5 billion people, there are only a few people who can talk with each other in sophisticated math and equations. And therefore, we're talking about the possibility that we're dealing with an intelligence that is so advanced and so different that even as it is trying, perhaps, in math and geometry to communicate something, that it is so few people on the planet who can even begin to muster a mathematical bridge in the communication, leaving all of the rest of us wondering. And that in and of itself, the inability to communicate advanced intelligence to human intelligence, seems to me to be one of the common denominators throughout all of the phenomena experiences that I've studied for 2 decades.
Well, that's a very well put statement, Linda, and it suggests to me that we have here something that is, and I just as a preface this, I'll say it's terribly unfortunate, and I think you'll agree that the very community that it is attempting to reach is the community that is least willing to look at what it has to say. That is to say,
and will do so only privately and confidentially and anonymously.
Which is a testament to the frailty of the human spirit and the need for the human intellect to become more open to the world around it and stop, frankly, pretending, which is they all are living in a child's garden of fantasies, the scientists are, as well as the media and all those other people. But in any case, could it be that it is a warning? And if that's true, maybe despite everything, there will be enough scientists, or enough mathematicians, I should say, willing to look at this to decipher it. And
if they don't, is the intelligence behind the crop formations willing to help?
Can it help?
Yeah.
Can it? It seems like this might be what it can do. That maybe there's not much more. But now, you mentioned there was no evidence of a connection between the abduction phenomenon or the close encounter phenomenon in crop circles, and there was that formation a couple of summers ago of the alien face with the disc beside it that seemed to be a communication that there is good out there despite all that appears otherwise. That formation, I don't think, could have been a hoax because of the intricacy and craftsmanship that was used in making it. It seemed almost impossible that it was a hoax. Was it a hoax or not?
That part I'm not sure, but we're now at the multi-level chess game question. Whitley, if a government is worried about events that are coming, whether they're astronomical or whatever they are, and they really don't want the public to catch on, what better way in multiple chess game moves to do something like the face of the classic now gray alien face that has been exposed more than anything else in this planet as possibly being extraterrestrial, and linking it to crop formations in an effort, basically, to misinform and ridicule both together. Very few people actually took that formation seriously because it was so recognizable.
Yes.
And this is the strange hall of mirrors with a quicksand floor that we're in. Anytime there is something that might be valid, it is attacked as a hoax or swamp gas or something. And then you find that on top of all of this, the intel groups are extremely skilled in using what the public has related to as extraterrestrial or some kind of Earth mystery, and then they ridicule it in this kind of third remove cushion shot, like that formation in England, and more people fall away to the side saying, well, neither one of them is true. And this is what we're dealing with. The numbers of efforts to keep people from paying serious attention to the crop formations and other Earth phenomena is, it seems to me, hugely intense now, and it keeps making me wonder, what do the administrations such as Britain and the United States know if they have any kind of advanced information about an event coming that is astronomical? Are they trying to just keep everybody surely mixed up, confused, and in the dark until the very last second?
Linda, it's a question that unfortunately we cannot answer right now, but I will tell you one thing. If the answer is ever found, the first person with it is going to be Linda Moulton Howe, and that means you should keep listening to Dreamland because you're not going to hear it anywhere else. Linda Moulton Howe, a science reporter with the courage to raise her eyes to the unknown and ask what is out there. Her website, earthfiles.com, make it a daily habit. Next week on Dreamland, Patrick Gerald, The Orion Prophecy, an explosive book, one of the best Dreamlands, I think personally, that I have ever done. I've already pre-recorded the interview with him. Patrick Gerald, The Orion Prophecy.
We are gods in the becoming. After all, cats give birth to cats and gorillas give birth to gorillas. God gives birth to gods. And so it's not about worship in the sense of cringing, what I call King Kong syndrome. It's about, let's give him a couple of virgins so he doesn't squash our village to pieces.
And there's only one at the top of the building, too, right?
Exactly. But it's about coming to know who we truly are, and what that truly is, whether we want to call it Buddha nature or the Christ within or the divine immanence, is to become aware of what we truly are, which is the divine. And so it's cooperation with, not falling on our face and debasing ourselves. That comes in when priesthoods cease to have true knowledge, true gnosis, so they resort to priestcraft, which is don't question me, just do what I tell you to. And that's why the esoteric traditions, particularly in the West, have been so persecuted down the centuries. So it's, in one sense, you're getting to know yourself, but the real self, with a capital S. And the great work itself is to become conscious of who and what we really are.
And so theurgy, then, as you describe it, is another term perhaps for God-making, of bringing the inner God out from within our true self. And
yes.
Then you write that the completion of the great work confers upon those who attain it extraordinary control over physical conditions, including the transmutation of matter, the healing of all diseases, and tremendous prolongation of the span of human incarnation.
Yes.
Where are we at today, in a sense? Are we transforming this notion of the great work? Especially what I'm wanting to ask you about here is the way that the role of technology in the great work. It seems in the past we've been dependent on spiritual technology, but now there's all kinds of literal physical technologies that are coming online where literally it's feasible that within the next decade we could have a chip implant us that could help us promote the advancement of the great work within us. What are those thoughts? What are your thoughts on that type of an idea?
I suppose I'm old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you stick a chip in a human body, but in most cases the body's still going to die. And also, even if they did things like preserving brains, we have to remember the brain is a tool and it's not consciousness itself. My thoughts on it are, I think in one sense we stand on the threshold of a potential spiritual renaissance in which these things can be shared, explored, and practiced on a scale never done before. But on the other hand, I don't want to fall into the category, you could say, of saying, we're on the we're about to go through some quantum leap in consciousness. There isn't much evidence of that if one looks at the news hard in the face. But I do think that these things are being made available in a way never before, partly, I suspect, because the more serious the disease, the stronger the medicine that's required. And, now we have the potential with fanatics of all religions, with their nuclear-tipped arms, who can eliminate sentient life from this planet. So I sort of take the view of, yes, it's a time of enormous potential and could be really the most amazing developments, but also we need to, be cautious about it too and recognize, not get too sentimental about, how spiritual we are. So I think technology has a place, but it also cuts the other way too. I mean, I use the technology a lot, and I find it amazing that with this tiny thing called a cell phone, I can talk to students in South Africa. For me, it's almost miraculous. But nevertheless, it is the death of telepathy. I remember a teacher who's a friend of mine. She did some of her stuff for her university degree up in Canada towards the Arctic, where she studied amongst indigenous native peoples, and was surprised one winter, was staying with them, that the next morning...
Our guest today will excite you. David Goddard is a Western Kabbalist, a teacher of secret knowledge. His book, Tree of Sapphires, is a compendium of esoteric lore and practical techniques to help understand the Kabbalah. His Tower of Alchemy is a must-have resource for all serious practitioners and lay readers alike. He lives in England, where he is a director of the Kabbalah Society, and he teaches internationally. David, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you very much.
Total pleasure to have you here with us, David. By the way of background here, we've here on Dreamland been opening a few chapters on Kabbalah and alchemy in recent months. The show's not exactly an alchemy forum, but we end up talking about it frequently. And you're not really talking to practitioners today, but people who are interested and conversant. So I wanted to start, if you wouldn't mind, with a little bit of an exploration about your bio. It says that you're a teacher and a lineage holder of the Western esoteric tradition who was trained by the Kabbalist Ben Halevi. What is the Western esoteric tradition, and who is Ben Halevi?
Okay. The Western esoteric tradition is really the mystical heart at the center of Western culture. So that's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to a degree. And the center of it is really generally called the Kabbalah. Zev Ben Shimon Halevi is one of the foremost living exponents of Kabbalah, and I've been a pupil of his for some 20 years. And even alchemy itself is really the practical aspect of alchemy, the practical aspect of Kabbalah, trying to manifest what the Kabbalah teaches in theory. And a lineage holder is quite simply somebody in a chain of teachers who've been trained, from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
So all the good bits are his and all the mistakes are mine.
That's great. Of course, alchemy, Kabbalah, at the center of it, I suppose, is a concept called the great work.
Yes.
What is the great work of alchemy and Kabbalah?
If one uses the theistic model of the Old Testament, all the elders were very excited because they all recounted the night before having gone in spirit or gone in dream states to another village some 500 miles away where there was a party, and they could talk about so-and-so who'd broken a leg and so-and-so who died, and they all spoke as if they'd been there. And this really impressed this friend of mine, particularly when a couple of weeks later, when there'd been a thaw, visitors from that village came to it and confirmed every single detail. But the downside of it was that she went back there 20 years later, and this kind of practice had almost died out because of television. You see what I mean? There's a certain thing about, if you're there in the quiet, in the dark, in the dream time, then of course the psychic faculties, to use a term, come into operation. But if your mind is constantly distracted by entertainment and stimuli, what need has it to do with such things?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a double-edged sword.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with David Goddard. David, just before the break, we were talking about the possible influence of technology on the great work. And I totally agree with you that technology is a dual-edged sword, but still one can't help but notice how the four symbols of the Grail, the disc, the cup, the rod, and the sword, are earth, air, and fire and water in terms of the elements, but today these four elements are reflected in four new power tools: genes, bits, neurons, and atoms. And when one looks at the use of genetic technology, of computer technology, of neuroscience, and the nanotechnology, what one immediately sees is that missing here is the fifth essence, the fifth element, the quintessence.
Yes.
How can we begin to promote or to shine a light, if you will, on this incredible rapid advance of technology?
Just as a model, there's the idea of the garden, the fall, the coming in of death, etc. So alchemy, which is really the Western form of yoga. Alchemy is really Kundalini yoga for the West, using Western motifs, Western symbols. What it seeks to do is to return its practitioners, and in turn humankind, to the first garden. It's rather like that song, "We are stardust, we are children, and we have to get ourselves back to the garden."
We are golden, right?
Yeah. The idea is that everything in human life, every form of suffering, pain, illness, even death itself, are obstacles put in our way, not to prevent us from being something, but to spur us on in our evolutionary growth, so that we become consciously immortal, and so that, to use a theistic model, God may behold God in the mirror of the universe.
Yeah, one of our friends and popular guests on Dreamland is Sir Lawrence Gardner, who wrote that originally we didn't worship the gods, we worked for the gods. The temples, as we think of them, were actually workshops that were places of workship, not worship. And I did some checking on this and found some interesting Babylonian sources on it that suggest that this may be true, and that the work that we did for the gods was we served them food. And this meant that in order for the gods to accept the food served by humanity, that food had to be pure, and this meant that the servants of the food, the workers, were pure too. And this suggests that the gods must have taught us alchemy, the great work, in order to become pure. What are your thoughts on that, and what happened to that sort of approach to our relationship with the quote-unquote gods?
Yes. I think it comes down to, first of all, broadly speaking, I agree. The idea is with theurgy, which means to cooperate with the divine. And here we have the idea, found in all valid esoteric traditions, that the depths of our deepest identity is the divine. We are one with the